For this session, we're going to be shifting focus to groups that are doing on-the-ground restoration works, groups that are working to manage lands, control invasive species present, prevent the spread, and how they are planting native species in place. We will hear examples from a municipality, a conservation authority, and an Indigenous-led stewardship group. So our first speaker will be the City of Toronto. So we have Margaret Good, who's a natural resource specialist. Hi, Margaret.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
Great to have you here. So Margaret's going to be talking about managing invasive horticultural plants in the City of Toronto.
Okay, great. I'm just going to share my screen here. All right, so thank you so much, Vicky, for the introduction. Um, so just for a little background on the City of Toronto's departments that undertake invasive species management and planting, we have the Parks and Recreation Division that has a Parks branch, and the Urban Forestry branch is in the Environment, Climate, and Forestry Division. So the Parks branch has a horticulture and greenhouse operations unit, which is responsible for horticulture, greenhouse plant production, and community gardens. And they also maintain gardens and parks grounds. Whereas the urban forestry branch maintains trees on streets and in parks and natural areas, and it delivers services such as forest healthcare, tree planting, community programs, and natural area management, which is the unit that I work in. So most of my presentation today is on an urban forestry perspective, but I did want to recognize that parks undertake some important work regarding horticultural invasives. So I'm going to go through some strategies that the City of Toronto has created to ensure that goals related to the environment are clearly laid out, prioritized, and budgeted for. So to start, the pollinator protection strategy was adopted by Council in 2018 with the goal of protecting the more than 360 species of bees and more than 100 species of butterflies and other pollinators in Toronto. So some guiding principles from this strategy are to prioritize actions that support native pollinator biodiversity, to create, enhance, and protect habitat in natural and urbanized areas using native plants, and to engage and support the community in taking action to help sustain Toronto's native pollinators. So the strategy has action items specified to achieve those goals. So I just wanted to highlight a few of those. We have action 2, which is to identify at least one site in each ward that can be enhanced for pollinators and serve as a model garden, and establish a pollinator demonstration garden at Toronto City Hall. We've successfully reached this target in every ward, and we do have pollinator habitat on the newly established podium green roof at City Hall. Action 3 is to create pollinator patches at urban agriculture sites by incorporating pollinator-friendly native plants. These gardens are overseen by individual community groups, and they do have lots of native plants established already. And then actions 19 and 22 involve educating the public on pollinator-friendly gardening tips and sharing native plant lists, which we do on our website and in outreach events. Moving on to our biodiversity strategy adopted by Council in 2019, it aims to support healthier, more robust biodiversity and increased awareness of nature in Toronto. The guiding principles cover recognizing the importance of biodiversity and also managing land in a way that focuses on native species and habitats. Some actions of note from this strategy are Number 9, to identify opportunities and priority sites for restoration. We have been working on priority sites to restore and create habitat across Toronto. Number 10 is to advance plans and programs for management of terrestrial invasive species. This was actually implemented through the next strategy that I'm going to speak about, the ravine strategy. And action number 11, to expand communication about invasive vegetation and planting of native species. We do a series of biodiversity booklets that help raise awareness, and you can find them on the City of Toronto's website. In 2020, City Council approved our ravine strategy. The vision of the ravine strategy is to support a ravine system that is a natural connected sanctuary essential for the health and well-being of the city, where use and enjoyment support protection, education, and stewardship. These are the guiding principles: protect, invest, connect, partner, and celebrate. To highlight a few actions from the ravine strategy, Action 2 is to ensure high quality work in our ravines by implementing best practices for capital projects and maintenance of infrastructure and natural ecosystems. So this includes funding for invasive species management, which is very important to our work in the Natural Resource Management Group. Action 3 is to develop training for staff and criteria to ensure protection of the natural value of our ravines. And 19 is to outreach and use good stewardship practices so that activities do not adversely impact natural habitats. So as a result of all of those strategies, the City of Toronto has planting policies and practices that contribute to reducing invasive species and increasing native species in Toronto. In urban forestry, we have the Ravine and Natural Feature Protection Bylaw, which requires 100% native species to be planted within the 11,000 hectares of area protected by the bylaw and as well in the natural heritage system. And at least 50% of those plants must come from a regionally appropriate seed source. The bylaw group also does provide guidance about invasive species management and reviews and approves stewardship plans. We also have the Toronto Green Standard, which provides recommendations for native species during development review, and they require 50% of plants planted post-development to be native in each category of herbaceous, shrub, and tree. Other policies within the urban forestry branch include using approved tree species lists for streets and parks. No Norway maples are planted by the City of Toronto, and we don't plant any invasive or aggressive non-native trees near to natural areas. Our hard surface sites do require very hardy species that are drought and salt tolerant. So that does rule out some native species in those areas, but we do plant native when possible. And we are currently managing 58 of our 89 environmentally significant areas across the city, which are areas that contain habitat for rare species of plants and animals, have high quality landforms, are of a large size, or have high biodiversity. And these areas, we are very strict about species selection, so we only plant native species sourced from seed collected in specific seed zones. So this is a section of our street tree brochure, which highlights the native trees in green. In orange, you can see native to North America, hybrids, and cultivars, and red species are not native at all. And so we use this to guide which trees we plant in residential areas. You can also find this on our website. And for urban forestry's restoration projects in natural areas, we source native trees and shrubs from our tree seed diversity program, which is a service agreement that the City of Toronto has with Forests Canada. It's a 10-year partnership to supply us with source identified trees and shrubs. And Forests Canada has a network of seed collectors who collect and manage appropriate seed for Toronto's changing climate. And then that is then grown into plant stock at their partner nurseries and delivered to us to plant. So the goal of this is to maintain native biodiversity in Toronto and also to maintain genetic variations within those populations, which will contribute to the future resilience of Toronto's urban forest. We have a goal of producing 25,000 trees and shrubs per year through this program, and we should be reaching that goal this year or next year, which is very exciting. We also have the private land planting program, which was launched in 2016, and it offers a range of grants and incentives to encourage tree and shrub planting on private property. So the city provides financial support of up to $500 per group to aid in hosting their own giveaways, and we also provide all the trees and shrubs for the giveaways. So each year, 14,000 trees and shrubs are planted on private property through this program. It does specifically prioritize single residential properties because based on our 2018 tree canopy study, the greatest land use for potential canopy growth lies with single residential properties, but these programs do also accommodate other property types as well. So this is a list of available grants and programming that all cover different groups such as charities, not-for-profits, schools and institutions, businesses, and of course, residential properties. We also have the Pollinate TO Grants Program, which was started in 2019 to fund pollinator habitat creation projects. So the city also provides up to $500 per project. And since 2019, they have helped create over 500 gardens. Priority is given to neighborhood improvement areas in this program, but any group can apply. So some examples include rain gardens, community gardens, school ground teaching gardens, and Indigenous education gardens on both private and public land. There are some guidelines to these, including 75% of the plants must be native with no invasive species. So now I just wanted to take a look at a little bit of our invasive species management that we do across Toronto. This is just a list of invasive plants that we are seeing in Toronto that are not currently on the market. They're regulated in Ontario, but they may have originated as horticultural species. So it's just a good reminder that we definitely need to be aware of what species we're putting in the ground intentionally, because they can get out of hand, like Norway maple, etc. And this is a list of plants we see in Toronto that are not regulated and can still be purchased. And we often find these escaping into the ravine system in Toronto, which can be a big issue, like periwinkle, of course, euonymus or burning bush is another big one. So to control these species, we use an integrated pest management system where we combine herbicide application with manual removal methods. This most often involves applying herbicide to the leaves, bark, or stump of plants, and by cutting or hand pulling. And in terms of priority, the Parks branch prioritizes removing invasive horticultural plants in gardens that are close to ravines and natural areas where they have the potential to spread. And when they renovate or create new gardens, they're ensuring to remove existing populations of invasive species and planting only non-invasive plants. For urban forestry, our natural resource management unit focuses on those environmentally significant areas. And we also use invasive management to prepare for new plantings and as part of our maintenance program for existing plantings to ensure native plants establish. And we do also have priority investment areas through our ravine implementation report to improve ecological health in those areas. So we also consider those when planning. These are just some example timelines on the work that goes into removing these invasive species once they're in a natural area. So it usually takes more than 2 herbicide treatments and biomass removal over years. So it takes a lot of work. So this is just an example of Japanese knotweed. We do manage it by cutting a couple times in a growing season and then treating the leaves with a chemical. And then we redo this process over a few years to control the population. These are our natural resource management stats. For this year, we managed 197 hectares of invasive trees and shrubs and 419 hectares of herbaceous invasives. So the majority of this occurred within environmentally significant areas across Toronto. And then I just wanted to put some stats together about our herbaceous plant control of potential horticultural origins by species. So you can see that Phragmites and Japanese knotweed are a big problem in Toronto, but we also have a lot of goutweed, Himalayan balsam, and miscanthus. And I will say that most of our 419 hectares of herbaceous control this year was on dog strangling vines. So we are tackling a lot of invasives in the city and not just horticultural varieties for sure. And here is just some current contractor pricing we're seeing per hectare for this type of work. We do have a group of contractors and also internal staff that manage invasive species for us. So it can definitely do a lot of damage to the budget because it's expensive work, but it is important. And this is an example site of some work we're doing in High Park. You can see the difference between treated and untreated euonymus or burning bush from this year. And this is a site 4 years after treatment that is still doing well, whereas we still have quite a ways to go on the right there with that euonymus forest crowding out our native species. And to end my presentation, I just wanted to highlight some examples of parks that incorporate a large portion of native species and naturalized horticultural practices. So we have Humber Bay butterfly habitat, Corktown Common, which is fully organically gardened by parks, Milne Hollow Garden, which has had a lot of volunteer work over the years, and Bidasque Park, which is a brand new park down in the Portlands. So I recommend checking that out for sure. These all show that naturalized gardens are beautiful and so important to our biodiversity and ecological health. So And that's my presentation. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll be around for questions later.
Great. Thank you so much, Margaret. It was really interesting to hear about some of the programs at the City of Toronto and some, especially those photos of the different parks and the costs as well, management. It's kind of eye-opening. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. No worries.
We'll see you at the Q&A.
Yep, see ya.
And with that, we are going to shift to a conservation authority's perspective, the Credit Valley Conservation's Invasive Species Management Program. So I have here Lee Merrill. Hi, Lee. He is a
Hello.
coordinator for terrestrial restoration at the Credit Valley Conservation Authority, and he will present. Yeah.
Sure, I'll just get my screen shared up here.
Yep.
Good to go?
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. So, hi everyone. Yeah, my name is Lee Merrill. I'm a terrestrial restoration coordinator with Credit Valley Conservation. I like to think I have a pretty decent understanding of invasive plants and the importance of proposing native plants as alternatives. Certainly advocate for doing so. And mainly that's because in the near decade I've been with CVC, I've seen and spent countless hours working on combating the impacts of invasive plants in our landscapes. I currently coordinate our invasive species management program, and I work closely with our various planting and restoration groups, as well as our education and outreach groups, who, of course, have an important role in promoting and using native species in restoration efforts. So we have a lot of similarities with our invasive species work as to what you just saw from Margaret in the city of Toronto. This presentation is a little different than what I usually present on. Specifically, I would focus more on our invasive species management program and specific details of it, because that's what I coordinate. But I'm also going to include some details on some other groups at CVC and some of the work they do, which I think is relevant for this conference. So I'm briefly going to talk about conservation authorities and provide some context on us, CVC. I'll talk about some invasive species as they pertain to CVC, including our management program, as well as our invasive species list. And I'm going to try and connect that to our restoration and outreach programming and how they make use of nursery stock and native plants. And I'll mention some resources we have or use to help guide towards invasive prevention and promoting native plant use as well. And then lastly, I'll try to touch on some ways we incentivize and engage the various audiences we interact with. So we are one of 36 conservation authorities in Ontario. We're established in 1954, located from our headwaters in Orangeville down to Lake Ontario in Mississauga. We're part of the treaty lands of the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And we start fairly rural up in the top of our watershed and get very urbanized as we head downstream. We are the primary scientific authority for the watershed, and we work in partnership with municipal governments, landowners, community organizations, schools, and businesses to deliver locally based programs such as planning and development, flood forecasting and warning, environmental monitoring, inventory and education, and much more. So broadly relevant to a lot of the things that we do or the negative impacts invasive species can have, and conversely, the positive impact we can have by promoting and restoring habitats through the use of native plant species. So just some context to our location is we have over 200 invasive species that are documented in our watershed, with the vast majority of those being invasive plants. Our more urban lower watershed has more than double the amount of invasive species presence, and it's increasing 1.5 times faster down there as opposed to our more rural upper watershed. And over 90% of our surveyed vegetation communities have one or more invasive species that have the potential to dominate the native ecosystem. And if we scale that to just on our properties, which is what's shown in the little map here, it increases actually to over 95%. And unfortunately, I'm sure it's a lot of the same story for wherever you're tuning in from today. So I'll touch on our invasive species management program that we have. So we started managing invasive species back in the early 90s when purple loosestrife first was an issue, becoming an issue in our wetlands. And then we formalized a program with the creation of our invasive species strategy in 2009 officially, and had our first dedicated staff at that point. Currently, we implement control on public properties, so that's mainly conservation authority and municipal partner-based work. But we're also providing technical guidance through site visits, workshops, volunteer events, and things like that to support private landowners and industry, and raise awareness towards preventing invasive species and also guiding invasive management work that they may be implementing. And obviously, that's especially important if they are engaged in other restoration initiatives and restoration programs with us. So we also have a contractor list that we try to keep updated that contains local invasive species control service providers. A lot of the time, that's half the battle for landowners, helping them figure out what they have and connecting them to a service provider that can deal with it. And then I'll mention that in 2020, we updated our invasive species strategy. It guides our program, and you can find it on our website. So we have an invasive species list that is an important part of the process of communicating what an invasive species is, why it's a problem, and how to identify them. It currently has 270 species listed across three categories shown here, with 56 of those being what we call a watch species. So those aren't yet found in our watershed, but they are nearby and they're threatening. So this list was developed in 2020, mostly through a combination of internal expertise, combining that with some literature review and a lot of input on actual experiences of what we're seeing in our watershed, and on our properties. And unfortunately, many of these species on the list are still readily available through nurseries. So we do share this list publicly as a tool for awareness, in addition to some other resources that I'm going to touch on a bit later. We also have this list prioritized down to management scale. So that's what you're seeing on this slide. We don't have the resources, of course, or the tools to manage all 200 plus of these invasive species we have documented. So we have to prioritize our efforts, and so that's what we've done here. And those decisions were made internally, taking into account things like how species are already regulated by government, whether it's local, provincial, or federal, as well as existing information and data on how aggressive and detrimental they are to areas within our watershed or in adjacent areas as well. Taking into account how they spread, how fast they spread, all their impacts beyond the environmental component as well, potentially to human health or the economy. And then taking all those factors that come into play, and populating them on this list. And that's even before any details on site specifics come into play, which of course also impact decision making on whether we might or might not manage something. And I'll just mention that things do change fast in the world of invasive species. Since this list was created in 2020, new species have been found, new ones are knocking on the door for our watershed. So it's currently undergoing a planned 5-year review, and we'll have an updated version coming out in early mid 2026. A few examples of some common species that get planted far too often that we end up managing because of how readily they take over. I won't go through them in detail, but I'll just mention that we follow an integrated pest management approach similar to Toronto's, and we of course follow best management practices from the OIPC, which are really useful. But a lot of the time, I'll mention we're implementing chemical management efforts, or a combination of chemical and mechanical management efforts, because these plants become so established, and we have a lack of other effective control options. So that was a little overview of our invasive species management program and its focus towards some of the horticulturally relevant invasive species. I'm going to shift gears now a little bit and mention that we have an in-house nursery at CVC. Of course, one way to ensure that you have native plants is to source and grow them yourself, with materials and seeds sourced, reputably and ideally locally. So this is what we call a finishing nursery, meaning we, for the most part, don't propagate our own seedlings. Our seedlings are sourced from local reputable wholesalers that we try to maintain connections with, aiming to keep good suppliers that are consistent and reliable. Some seed is also collected locally for specific species or projects, and that's sent off to be propagated. And then the seedlings are grown to a larger size, so usually 2 to 3 gallon pots. We pot nearly 50,000 units each spring. Mostly that's trees and shrubs, but also grasses and wildflowers as well. And the nursery has upwards of 80 to 90 different native species at any one time. So I'll mention the purpose is not for public sale. So although there are landowner sale days that we offer, we're not just generally open to the public. This nursery's purpose is to maintain inventory of CVC recommended plant stock, which is then used directly in CVC's planting programs that work both on public and private lands. So it's used in restoration programming, outreach and volunteer programming, municipal partner programming, and even for some not-for-profit tree planting groups supporting them as well. So it's definitely really helpful for us to be able to promote planting programs that come with locally sourced native stock that's grown and ready in our own nursery. And of course, that's not always an option to have your own nursery, but there's other avenues I'll mention for partnerships between those doing invasive removal or subsequent restoration efforts. And it's important for those doing that kind of work to connect with growers beyond just the purchasing of stock, being involved and knowledgeable with their sources, with their practices, with their values, and the reputation they have. All of that is super valuable. We also have some useful resources, I think, that I wanted to mention. So there's many good resources that we rely on, a lot of them from the OIPC, for example, the best management practices for controlling invasive species, the Grow Me Instead guides. I use those. They can be really helpful. But we needed a more targeted and specific guidance around native plant selection pertaining to our watershed audience. So we have a few guides for native plant selection that are split into the categories based on habitat type that someone might have available. This isn't my work, but I use these guides and they were put together through a review process of native plants that are recommended by CAs, other conservation authorities neighboring us, as well as landscapers and local nurseries, and then refined down to what is most recommended and often available to source locally. So these are applicable for encouragement and education around native plant promotion. I use them in the context similar to the GMI guide. You know, this is the bad invasive you've got. Let's get rid of it. This is how you do that. And then let's assess what might be best to plant based on the details we find in these guides. So we've got the three of them. One is focused on woodland plants, one for prairie and meadow plants, and one for generally wetter habitats. And I'll mention kind of supplemental to that, in addition to those guides, we have one that is for native plant nurseries as well. And so it currently has 31 nurseries included in the guide that meet specific criteria. And that criteria at the moment is having greater than 75% native stock, although I'll mention that most of them on the list actually have 100% or very close to it. And they're within 150 kilometers of our watershed border for accessibility. So part of the process of putting this guide together, of course, involved connecting with these nurseries, see if they meet the criteria, and obviously that served as a bit of an educational opportunity when engaging with them, maybe even serving a bit as a bit of incentive for them to stock more native species if they wanted to be on the list. Both the nursery list I mentioned and the list of invasive control service providers. Those lists are what we are aware of, but we, of course, don't provide actual recommendation about the quality of their stock or services. We're just making our audience aware that there are options, and then we can provide guidance supplementally to that. So here's just a snippet from the beginning of the Prairie and Meadow Guide. Lots of great information kind of in the foreword of the document. These are on our website, available for digital download. You can find them all. Here's an example of how the species are listed, kind of clear information on habitat requirements, soil type, sunlight requirements, growth size, tolerances, bloom time and color, what wildlife it supports, and any other valuable information. And lastly, I just wanted to mention some details regarding some incentives and engagement strategies we take, because of course the approach you engage with your audience matters a lot if you're hoping it results in action. And incentives, often financial, certainly help too. So we have some initiatives there. So these are some of our programs that are ongoing. We have a landowner action fund, and this provides funding to incentives to rural landowners to sustainably manage their properties. There's various eligible incentives that are listed there you can see, but most relevant would be the planting options for native trees, shrubs, and herbaceous species. So large scale, that's through our potted or seedling planting programs, or smaller scale for pollinator patches and sustainable gardening. And of course, invasive species control is eligible as well. And essentially, if they meet a specific criteria for a project that we deem valuable, they get guidance and then financially incentivized to take on that project. We also have a free neighborhood tree giveaway program for urban landowners where our home planting team will deliver and help plant one free 2-gallon tree or shrub. And we have many volunteer and education opportunities, including volunteer work days at our conservation areas or for municipal partners where community volunteers can come help remove invasive plants and plant native species back. And this type of engagement really helps drive home the message on the impacts of invasive species, especially when they see them spilling from neighboring properties. And then the last thing I'll mention before I leave you is we have our Conservation Youth Corps program, where high school students spend 35 hours of volunteer working with us, which includes managing invasive plants. And so all these programs kind of work to provide knowledge on the importance of our natural habitats and the impact invasive species have on them. And hopefully they can retain that knowledge when they engage in practices in their personal life and related to horticultural practices as well, and choose native. So that's all I've got for you today, and happy to answer questions at the question period.
Great. Thank you so much. So that's all the time we have, unfortunately, for questions. Any of the additional ones will be put in the chat for you guys to answer. So now we're going to be moving on to the next session. So we'll be introducing Gabby on the stage. Hi, Gabby.
Thanks, Vicki, and thanks to our previous speakers there. We're now moving on to our Exploring Solutions panel. So in this panel, we will be talking about or exploring how we can continue growing solutions in this space. This session will highlight some opportunities as well as current initiatives in Ontario, Prince Edward Island, and across Canada about these different groups that are working to really forward things on this issue. So to start us off, I'll invite Mackenzie DeGaspero, manager of our youth engagement stewardship program with Invasives Canada. Mackenzie will be speaking on the topic of Say Yes to Community Action on Invasive Species and with Youth Eco Stewards. So thanks, Mackenzie. I'll welcome you up.
Thank you, Gabby. Let me make sure I get my screen right for you guys. How does that look, Gabby? Is that okay?
That looks great. Yep, thank you.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you everyone for sticking around to the very end of the conference here for us in this last session. I'm excited to join everyone today to talk about, as Gabby mentioned, our new youth initiative. So our program is called Youth Eco Stewards. A little bit about us. We're a national skill building and volunteer program hosted by Invasives Canada, and we're funded through the Canadian Service Corps. So our program has really been inspired by my own and our team's experiences in the field and as students and professionals navigating the green career, conservation, and biodiversity space. And we're really hoping to offer our participants real world job experience and supportive green career training, leading them into a green career, hopefully that has an aspect of invasive species in it. So all of our youth projects, you'll see as I go through the presentation, we try to layer in invasive species wherever we can based on the youth's interest. So as you all know, if you're interested in invasive species or study invasive species or work with them, there's all kinds of connections. So that's really what we work to show our youth, that really no matter what your interests are, there's probably an invasive species connection there, unfortunately. So we kind of work within 4 pillars in the program: our online education, training, and engagement. We have self-guided learning paths for our remote participants that maybe don't have a coordinator living close by to them. And then we have our youth-guided events, activities, and projects that are supported by our regional coordinators. and of course, career networking and mentorship. And I'll get into each of these 4 pillars now. So our online engagement has really, for the most part, thus far, taken an asynchronous training and virtual educational workshop tone right now. Thus far, we have offered some asynchronous training options for career advancement, including some Indigenous awareness courses, Clifton Strengths Top 5, so our participants can see what their strengths are moving into their careers, Mindwell Mindfulness for Leaders, and some outdoor learning school certificate courses. We've also offered a variety of green career panels to our participants that have been organized by our coordinators with experts in the field. Some examples of those, last month in October, we held, or end of October, we held a green career panel that spoke about navigating the summer job landscape and things you can do to try to land that perfect summer job. We had Eco Canada discuss their environmental designation in an info session. And then actually happening right now as we speak, we have our second Eco Canada HR resume review session. So we had, I think, 6 or 8 students sign up who are kind of looking forward into their resume creation and looking for new jobs. So we had Eco Canada's HR services do a workshop for them to walk through their resumes, see how you can improve them, and how to really talk about your skills to help you land that great job. As far as next year, we're really hoping to build on our technical and skill-based workshops and asynchronous courses coming up in 2026. So we've got a bunch of great plans for January to build that invasive species skill set and that fieldwork skill set to prepare all of our participants for the upcoming field season so they can hit the ground running with their own passion projects. And as far as networking, we've got a lot of stuff on the go that's going to be launching in January, including our networking hub, which I'm really excited about. It's going to be able to host a bunch of different resources that will help our participants to complete their projects, things like inspiration for projects that they can do, like bio blitzes, how to do a garlic mustard pull, things like that, that they can kind of take and use as inspiration. But I really wanted to highlight one event that we held in October called the Eco Changemakers Conference. This was our first kind of networking / leadership style conference that we put on. We co-hosted this event with the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society's Southern Alberta chapter. And this was a really great event. It brought youth from across Canada together to talk about how to network and really build those connections and build community and things that are maybe missing in their own lives right now. And it was really, really inspiring, for lack of better words, to see all of the students and participants really getting engaged and excited about working and being involved in this field. So getting into some of our youth-led events and activities, we were really ramping up in the fall, so we didn't get a ton of youth projects going across all of our regions. So I'm going to kind of use Ontario as a good example because we had a couple of great pilot projects per se, happening in Ontario that we're hoping to expand across the country. So we had Karina here as one of our participants. She hosted a pretty cool engagement project where she brought a bunch of people out into a field. They did a weed pull and then did a little planting activity where they did some native plant potting. So Karina kind of took it upon herself to get all of the information about the species removals, get all of the supplies set up, and then organized a group to come out and do that. And then one of my Ontario coordinators also organized a group of co-op students with Trent University who were in a conservation program. This was just wrapping up at the end of the semester. So she had about 6 students that each ran their own project as part of their university co-op. So they each had individual things. Some of them were, Karina's is an example of that, where hers was kind of more social based. She was looking at what her group's perspectives may look like after experiencing this event. So she surveyed their perspectives before the event and after the event, and seeing what this information could do to their perspectives. But this project's really exciting. All of these students really found the projects really, really valuable in terms of really wrapping up their course and finding those real life, real world scenarios where they could implement what they've been learning. So we hope to continue these pilot programs at the university and college level through our different regions now that we've seen success here. And this map is just a little example of some of the organizations that we have been working with in Ontario to give a breadth of the kinds of projects that we're hoping to work on. Now I'm just going to dive into our self-guided activities where participants are able to just go online and go outside and get involved in these activities wherever they may be in the country. So first I'm going to talk about our eco-missions. So eco-missions are, as I said, on-demand and self-guided challenges that are supposed to empower our participants to really learn about seasonal aspects of conservation and incorporate year-round learning and action. So all of our missions are seasonally themed and really developed to have our participants be able to go outside in February and be able to appreciate nature and wildlife and see everything that's existing in the dead of winter in February, which maybe some people have not thought of before, right?
Few minutes.
What I really like about this is that they get to progress from explorer to innovator through these different levels. So it's a bit gamified in that way. And we layer an invasive species challenge or restoration challenge in each of these activities. And these are really just meant to inspire and motivate. They can make them their own and take them as they will. And I've got a little example here of one of the past missions. So this is kind of what the seasonal breakdown may look like from September to November. This was our very first set of eco missions. So the theme was foundations and engagement. And then the mission itself, I used the fungi and decomposers example, where you can see that skills are being built through each of these levels, where you're taking photographs, building a mini guide, taking people on a walk to teach them about what you've learned, and then creating a long-term project. We also have a National BioBlitz Challenge, which that last eco mission project can kind of lead into, as we're really hoping that participants can make a bunch of observations and get out on the land and really observe both native and invasive species in their backyards. So again, we have monthly themes that go along with this. Again, this is February, March here, as I provided for examples, that we've got frozen finds in February, so that, you know, we're looking for things maybe covered in ice or evergreen invasive species that stay green all year long. And then Invasive Species Action Month, we're hoping to really get going as the spring season starts and try to observe all of those invasive species that are popping up early spring. So here's just a snapshot of what our observations are looking like so far. We have iNaturalist projects for each province and have 176 observations so far from September till now. And I'm going to spend the last of my time here just to discuss why you should care about this program. I've really spent up till now talking about why our participants should care and be excited, but really you should be too. I heard in the last couple of presentations, people that are looking for volunteers, or maybe speaking of not having enough volunteer time. And this is a great program to help support that. We have a really great crew of our eco stewards that are really keen, excited individuals that are excited to learn and excited to get into this field. So we're going to be supporting their, training and education on a bunch of different technical skills, so they can come to you as a volunteer prepared and ready to work. And they're inspired to continue that volunteer work by some of the milestones and initiatives that we have. We have, prizes and packages for every hour milestone that they hit. We have field gear for them to help support that. Free training and education. So they have a bunch of perks for being in our program as well. So that's going to keep them engaged as well in any volunteer project that they're doing. So please, I really hope that if you do have volunteers, no matter where you are across Canada, you can reach out to me and get these youth into the program or get our youth into your programs. We have people that are doing, like Karina, outreach and education, training other people on invasive species. They're going to be able to promote these plant-wise and clean seed and seed soil messaging, and also just support native ecosystems through these removal events and outreach events. So how else can you get involved other than taking on a volunteer? You can join some of our virtual activities by doing a basic presentation about your craft, your research, or your project, like you've done here today if you're a presenter. You can talk about your project framework and how you got to where you are today. All of our participants are really at the point in their careers where they're wanting to learn how you got to where you are, not only with your projects, but also in your career. So talk to us about your career trajectory. We can do an Ask Me Anything. We can collect questions from our participants ahead of time and do a little interview with you. You can do a species spotlight on your favorite project, share challenges, or get support with your project. And I think I am probably just on time, Gabby.
Yes, coming up.
Okay, and that's everything from me. So thank you guys so much. And like I said, I've got my email here, and please reach out if you are interested in collaborating with us.
Thanks so much, Mackenzie, and hopefully some of you can reach out to Mackenzie and get some engagement from youth in the program. All right, next up, I'm going to be inviting Chase Gaindoe, who's the coordinator of the PEI Invasive Species Council. Chase is leads one of our chapters and is implementing PlantWise and Grow Me Instead in PEI. So Chase is going to be sharing some of the insights from on-the-ground work that they're doing there. Chase, I'll invite you to share your screen when you're ready.
Okay, let me know if this shows up as non-presenter view in just a second.
Yep, it's looking good now.
How's that?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, awesome. Going backwards, let's get to the start. Okay. All right, here we go. Okay, thanks for having me, Invasive Canada folks and everybody on the webinar. My name is Chase Gaindoe. I'm the coordinator of the PEI Invasive Species Council, as Gabby said, and today I'm going to discuss how we collected and used experiential data to guide solutions to the horticulture pathway here on the island. So the PEI Invasive Species Council is a nonprofit here on PEI and an operating chapter of Invasives Canada. Our work is focused on the ground management, which is sort of our bread and butter throughout the field season, as well as surveying and monitoring for invasive species and, of course, outreach and education activities. We're a small team of just 3 staff, but our council is made up of representatives from a number of local and national partner organizations which support and direct our work, and those are the folks with their logos on the screen there. So I like to start off our presentations with these photos because they're really our best example of how damaging these plants can be on PEI. This is a photo of a periwinkle invasion at Strathgartney Provincial Park just outside of Charlottetown. And it's hard for the photo to do it justice, but it's just periwinkle as far as the eye can see in both directions from where I took this photo. And it's just completely destroyed a large part of this forest. So as you can see, there's virtually no recruitment of new treed seedlings. So this part of the forest basically has no chance at natural regeneration at this point, which is a process that's, of course, extremely important to us, especially these days with the increased frequency of severe storms that can knock down our forests. And you can see much of these trees are victims of that. This periwinkle, as you might have guessed, is growing in from a neighboring property where it was intentionally planted. So what can we do? To to start off our horticulture project, last year we formed the PIISC Horticulture Working Group to collaborate on realistic solutions to this problem. We brought in partners from garden centers, landscape companies, federal government, provincial government, and local conservation organizations to meet and sort of direct the solutions here. So I'm going to mainly talk about the data we collected to guide our solutions that we would implement through the working group. So before we tried anything, we wanted to run a couple surveys to understand customer behavior and challenges as perceived by the horticulture industry itself, as well as a survey of gardeners to try and understand their decision-making process and behaviors in the garden. So our industry survey was distributed directly to businesses here on PEI. It was not open to the public. We received 12 responses on that one, which is not a lot, but a fair number, sort of considering the size of the industry here on the island. And our public survey was distributed through paid targeted advertising and used a draw for a native plant nursery gift card as its incentive. We received 330 responses on that one, which we thought was enough to make some inferences from. So I only have enough time to talk about 2 of the challenges that we identified by these surveys. But we got a lot of data out of these surveys, and we got a lot out of this initiative in general. But I'm just going to highlight sort of 2 particular things. So one of the first things we asked in the industry survey was, how often do customers or clients ask about the status of a plant, being is it native, non-native, or invasive? And from the responses, we found that customers are generally unlikely to ask about the status of a plant. So it doesn't happen too often. But when we look at the results from this question in the public survey, we see that one of the most important things to customers when choosing plants for their garden is that they are non-invasive, which was about tied with the plants being attractive to pollinators. And I know sort of all the titles for those bars are cut off, so you'll just have to trust me. The second most important consideration identified by the same question is that the plants are native and the plants are inexpensive. Unfortunately, those things, at least on PEI, are sort of at odds with each other. In the public survey, we also found that less than half of respondents would check online to see if the plant was invasive prior to purchase, and even less would check to see if it is native. And we also found through that same question that only about 1/3 of respondents would ask the staff about the plant before purchasing, which lines up with the data from our industry survey. So the problem we identified here was that gardeners want to purchase native and non-invasive plants, but they're unlikely to ask or research the plant prior to purchase. The solution was to label native plants as native. We had originally thought that it would be great if invasive plants were labeled as such in the garden center. Of course, I think we would all agree that that would be helpful to our cause, but figured from a business standpoint, that would not be a realistic ask for the garden centers for obvious reasons. And that kind of shaped how we would approach this whole project, with more of a positive framing to highlight the benefits and beauty of native plants rather than focusing on the native aspects of invasive species, which we are already doing all the time in our outreach just as the nature of the topic. So then we asked ourselves, would garden centers even be willing to label native plants as native? Well, we had already asked that in our industry survey and found that almost all retailers would be willing to do that. The pie chart kind of got skewed because we had just an open-ended option there. But generally, all retailers would want to label their native plants as native, and why wouldn't they? So this is what we came up with, and we ended up with going with the sticker on the left over the plant stake because it was more cost effective and could be applied to the pricing sign rather than in each pot. So we printed a bunch of these up and distributed them to partner retailers, directing them to either contact us or use data from the Atlantic Canada Conservation Data Center if they were unsure if a species was native or not. But these went to retailers that sort of we work closely with. They weren't necessarily distributed just far and wide. So the second and final problem that I'm going to discuss came from this question in the industry survey, and it was, do you feel your staff are equipped to answer questions from customers on invasive plants? We found here that most staff would likely not be able to confidently answer questions about invasive species, and this makes sense, especially considering the seasonal nature of these jobs. A lot of the time they're summer students just working part-time in between the school years, which I think is fair. But I think we can also all agree that it's really important for customers to understand invasive species and responsible gardening practices when they're making a purchase. Especially when we see responses like this from our public survey, where nearly 20% of respondents self-reported as disposing of their garden waste in nearby areas, which of course can lead to invasive plants being introduced outside of the garden. So just beyond messaging about planting native, we thought we should also be addressing responsible gardening practices as a whole. So the problem here was that staff are likely not equipped to answer questions about invasive species. And the solution, again, a pretty simple one, was to provide written information at the point of sale. Now, would garden centers be willing to distribute this information? Again, we had already asked that in our industry survey and found that this was the most desirable way to communicate this information to the customer. So this is what we came up with. This is a double-sided rack card with lots of important information about responsible gardening and invasive species. We had to work with the garden centers on this and walk a bit of a thin line as to not produce something that would, scare off customers, but still get the message across. So again, we decided to mostly come from a positive and informative approach rather than something that would sort of villainize garden centers, as they would not display it if that was how it came off, of course. Here's a picture of how those rack cards ended up looking at one of our partner retailers. This is Jewel's Country Market, probably the biggest plant retailer on PEI. We also published a webpage on the horticulture pathway, which was linked from a QR code on the rack card so people could find out more information. And of course, our work is not done. We identified several problems and challenges through these surveys. So moving forward, we hope to be able to provide staff training and support to the garden centers, and sort of try and address that gap in knowledge and being able to provide that knowledge to the customer. Of course, we want to engage with the larger retail chains that sell plants. We want to promote native plants in public spaces and on social media. One of the things that we found in our survey was that people select plants a lot of the time based on what they see growing elsewhere, either, whether it's a public garden or at a friend's house. So we want to try and get more native plants into public spaces, and we've been doing social media posts every few weeks on our co-chair's native plant garden to try and showcase these plants and push for more awareness and desire for these species and hopefully influence demand a little bit. And of course, we'd love to distribute a Grow Me Instead guide for PEI. So there's lots more I could talk about. I think I'm close to time, so we'll end it there. Here's our information if you want to get in contact with me about this or any other invasive species issues on PEI. Thanks for listening. That's it.
Thanks so much, Chase. That was great to hear about the work being done there. We'll move on quickly here to our next presenter. We'll be hearing about the implementation of the Southern Ontario Seed Strategy, and we have Jennifer Nanta presenting. Jennifer is the Healthy Habitat Manager with Carolinian Canada Coalition. With Carolinian Canada, and I'll let Jennifer share your slides.
Hi, thanks so much. Bear with me while I get queued up here. Okay, that looks
great.
Thanks.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. We're really excited to be here as a part of this conference and connecting with you all. My name is Jennifer Nata, and I'm the Healthy Habitat Manager with Carolinian Canada. So over the next little while, I'll be as brief as I can, but I'm going to talk a bit about our organization, the journey we've been on for the last few years to develop a seed strategy for Southern Ontario, how that strategy supports the work that you're doing and on a broader level supports restoration, biodiversity, and climate change goals, what we're up to now with implementing the strategy, and how you can participate and, show alignment with your work and the work of the Southern Ontario Seed Strategy, or SOS as we like to call it. Carolinian Canada is a nonprofit working to heal and protect the Carolinian zone through programs, resources, and relationships. We've been around for 40 years. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary, and we're a partnership organization with an Indigenous leadership pillar that fosters reciprocal relationships with the 10 First Nation communities in the Carolinian Zone and beyond. So for those reasons and more, we felt well positioned to begin the journey to develop a seed strategy for the region. And that work actually started even earlier with this document, The Economy of Hope, which is a report that can be found at the site at the bottom of the screen there. This report really contains lots of research, surveys, and interviews with folks to develop a profile and inform an understanding of the native plant sector, primarily in the Greater Golden Horseshoe region, but with applications far beyond that. It came up with 6 main recommendations, 2 of which were to center Indigenous leadership and engagement and develop a seed strategy for Southern Ontario. So digging into some of the research that is included in this report, we connected with a lot of native plant growers and nurseries on the supply side, and some of their top 5 barriers to growth included things like market instability, limited operation size, the need for significant financial investment, a lack of funding or budget, and limited seed sources. So for the first time for the native plant sector, we had a lot of quantitative data, but through those connections and through those interviews, it also really started to paint a clearer picture and tell a story of some of the challenges that folks dealt with. And examples like this, the guess and grow model was shared by one native plant grower who, is faced with the task of trying to determine what folks might need next year and beyond, especially with growing some of the slower growing species like trees, trying to guess and grow and then hope that you've made the right choices, you're growing the right species, you're growing the right quantities, you're going to be able to sell those. And it really puts the grower at the disadvantage of assuming all that risk. And it also puts the folks on the demand side at a disadvantage as well, because they're the other end of that guess and grow model. So that lack of assured demand was really kind of highlighted through this report. So the survey participant here said, the number one challenge is trying to predict what will be in high demand in future seasons. Since it fluctuates and changes every year, it would be very helpful if growers could be included in conversations surrounding future plans, estimated quantities, and estimated species. So it makes a lot of sense. And so things in this report, really informed our work with developing the strategy and continues to inform our work as we're implementing the strategy today. And connecting with folks on the demand side, some of their top 5 barriers to growth included similar things: lack of funding, limited plant sources, the need for significant investment, limited operation size, and seed sources. So challenges on both sides. And that report also demonstrated support for a strategy to address these challenges, with 76% of respondents agreeing that Ontario needs a native seed strategy that supports the native plant industry to provide the native seeds and plants needed to meet market demand. And 63% agreed that access to a greater diversity of local native seed will directly improve their production, use, and/or distribution for current and future projects. And if you look at the table on the right here, it shows that a regional strategy will maximize positive impacts for adaptation, diversity, availability, and affordability in the little vertical bar there. A regional strategy is also better able to center Indigenous seed sovereignty, protect wild populations, support a network of sites, and provide an affordable alternative to cultivars that dominate the market. And it's timely to have a strategy out and be implementing that strategy now because there's a huge need for seed. Plants are needed to support global, national, and regional targets, as well as retail demand, and we simply don't have enough. Even if there was enough support for our huge restoration targets, we literally don't have the plants, and we need seeds to grow them. Canada's global and national commitments to restore 30% of degraded lands by 2030 depend on a reliable supply of native seed and plants. So to accomplish any of this, we need native seed. And not just any, we need a full diversity of ethically sourced, genetically appropriate native seed to be reliably available and in large quantities. So here it is, after all that planning and research, the Southern Ontario Seed Strategy is available at the site at the bottom of the screen there. And it's really the culmination of 4 years working together to develop a strategy that aims to grow more native plants, grow them better, and set a course for the preservation and restoration of the landscape in Southern Ontario. Our goal was to accomplish this by working together in ethical space to share knowledge and develop innovative solutions. We accomplished this through the establishment of a diverse collective, a commitment to two-eyed seeing, and a lengthy journey to develop the seed strategy for the region. So here's a high-level peek at the strategy. The SOS vision is a full diversity of native plants, cultural practices, and thriving ecosystems flourishing across a healthy Southern Ontario landscape, and the mission to ensure the availability of source-identified native seed for cultural needs and ecological restoration to heal relationships with the land and people. The SOS contains 5 goals with a focus on establishing ethical space within the native plant sector, increasing supply and supporting demand for native plants, developing tools to support seed conservation and stewardship, developing strategies for the use of native plants within sectors, and identifying further two-eyed seeing knowledge needs. These 5 goals are supported by 15 objectives and 43 recommendations to increase supply and support demand for reliably available, genetically appropriate native seed. And from the beginning of this journey, we set out to create a strategy that was a bit different from the others, which have been predominantly rooted in Western science approaches. A seed strategy for Southern Ontario needed to be created in ethical space using a two-eyed seeing approach. And two-eyed seeing refers to learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of Western ways of knowing, and using both of these eyes together. Much of the remaining habitat and biodiversity in Southern Ontario are stewarded by Indigenous communities. Indigenous peoples have had a vital and active role in stewarding this land since time immemorial, but have not always been given a seat at the table when discussing the land in the conservation sector. Reaching our collective goals is only possible through meaningful collaboration and braiding knowledge systems. The SOS places native plants as residing at the intersection of ethics, economy, and ecology, bringing together these values and priorities to produce a holistic strategy and incorporate perspectives and leaders in each of the 3 pillars. In light of those ambitious restoration goals, this is a critical moment to support the establishment of an ethical native seed supply chain. As the demand for native plants increases, that gap is going to be filled, and we need to ensure that genetically appropriate, source-identified native plants are available where and when needed to avoid these gaps being filled with the wrong plants. Retail demand for native plants has also shown a steady increase as more people are turning to habitat gardening to combat biodiversity loss and climate change and just to connect with nature. Integrating ethical criteria will help identify additional gaps in the supply chain to address illegal collection and overharvesting of wild populations, avoid over-reliance on a limited number of source populations to preserve genetic diversity, and ensure equitable benefits for local communities involved in seed collection or production. Timely action is needed to address the demand, and ensuring that the transition to a native seed supply chain values diversity is founded on sustainable principles. So the strategy is out there, it's available for you to use and to share. And now that the strategizing is over, we've really jumped right into action. The work we're doing right now supports reconciliation through restoration, as reintroducing native plants to the landscape helps restore healthy ecosystems and the native species diversity that existed before colonization, working together to heal the land. Activities support an ethical native seed supply chain. We're uniquely positioned to help direct this development and avoid unchecked and inappropriate use of the wrong seed. So the release of the strategy really presents a unique opportunity to strengthen all of our efforts. And as we're jumping right into implementation, one of the things we did first was to take one of those 43 recommendations, the establishment of regional native seed partnerships, and we've been working on that throughout 2025 in partnership with the Ontario Native Plant Growers Association. These partnerships bring together growers and users to align supply and support demand around regional priorities, all with the goal of supporting and accelerating the transition to locally sourced native plants. And here they are from left to right. We're working on the mapping, but you can see the big dotted circles. The partnerships that we facilitate are in southwestern Ontario, the Central West region, the Greater Golden Horseshoe West and East, and our good friends at the Canadian Wildlife Federation facilitate the one in Eastern Ontario. And we work closely together and try to align our activities in support of all of these partnerships together. And the circles are purposely kind of loose and overlapping because these maps do not set the rules, the boundaries are imaginary. It's simply presenting opportunities where people are working together. The SOS and the resulting partnerships can help combat invasive species and support healthy landscapes by coordinating restoration efforts, promoting the use of native plants that naturally outcompete invasives, lowering long-term management costs, improving ecosystem resilience and wildlife habitat, supporting local economies through regional seed production, and engaging communities in biodiversity and restoration. And we've recently just launched a SOS logo that we're really excited about. So the main one on the left there, I've had on every slide so far. The upper right one just has the icon, and then the one on the bottom right is just the acronym SOS with the icon in the O. We developed a logo to create visibility for all of the activities aligned with the SOS goals and recommendations, and to show alignment between all of our work, not just what we're doing at Carolinian Canada and the SOS partners and the folks in the partnerships, but the work that people have been doing in the region since before we even had a strategy. All this amazing work that shows we're all working together toward the same goals. So this strategy is available. I'll walk you through it and let you know how to connect. And if you guessed it, the plant that we use for our logo is bloodroot. The meaning and design of this logo, it represents the start of ecological renewal and demonstrates the different stages of the seed cycle. So some artistic liberties were taken with scale and showing the seeds sprouting and then the leaf and the blossom, but we're happy with it. We think it looks really lovely. And it signals the importance of supporting the growth of the regional native seed system from the ground up. Other species were considered, but bloodroot was the clear favorite because of its cultural significance. It's a plant with a long-standing significance to Indigenous peoples and has been welcomed as a sign of spring for thousands of years. It embodies respect, relationship, and reciprocity with the land. It's also got incredible ecological significance. It supports early season nutrient cycles. It's one of the earliest native spring blooms. I love seeing it. I can't wait to see it again this spring. It provides critical food for the early pollinators and contributes to biodiversity and is an indicator of healthy, resilient ecosystems. And the SOS logo reflects SOS values. When you use the SOS logo, it really means something. It demonstrates alignment with the inherent ethics and values embedded within the strategy. So it shows not only what you're doing, but how you're doing it, reflecting that activities center ecosystem health and cultural importance, reflect Indigenous leadership and stewardship, address climate change and biodiversity loss, reflect collaboration across the native seed and plant sector, and connect partners to a shared vision of a sustainable, ethical green economy. So you are invited to participate in any way that you see fit. You can join one or more regional native seed and plant partnerships. You can just keep doing what you're doing. And if that, supports the SOS and the SOS supports your work, you can align your work by using the logo. To do that, all that you have to do is agree to a document that we've created called the Intention to Collaborate. It's a short, simple, easy document with no intimidating commitments. The simple intention to collaborate in this way is the only commitment. And if you agree to that, we'll send you the logo. So we're excited about the logo. We're excited about our first ever Southern Ontario Seed Strategy Gathering, which will be coming up real soon, February 26th at the Balls Falls Conservation Area site. We're going to start, or continue rather, having some important conversations we've been having within the partnerships about sharing knowledge and aligning native seed and plant needs for, the first 1 to 5 years, and then talk about how we're going to continue to do that in the future. So thank you so much. Thank you to you folks for listening. Thanks to all the SOS partners who help put that strategy together and continue to support it. Thanks to the folks who fund this work, without whom we wouldn't be able to do it. And thank you. So if you want to reach out to me at all, there's my email and the general email for all things SOS, Southern Ontario Seed Strategy related. And thanks so much, folks.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Also love when an acronym can spell out something that's catchy like that. That's great. Awesome. All right, we'll move on to our next and final speaker here. We're going to be talking about a working group that's starting in Ontario, tackling the hard questions with nursery growers. So I'll invite Dr. Janine West, who's a grower technical analyst with Landscape Ontario Horticulture Trades Association.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you, yes.
Great. I'm just trying to clean my screen up here and get this where it's supposed to be. All right. Thank you for everyone for sticking around. I've got the great spot of being the very last speaker of the day. I am based in Innisfil, and Innisfil is on the traditional shared territory of the Anishinaabe, including Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. It is home to First Nations like the Beausoleil First Nation, Chippewas of Rama First Nation, and the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, as well as Métis people, with historical roots to the Wendat Huron people. And I thank them for generations of stewardship. I want to kind of wrap up some of the discussions from the nursery grower production side that have happened over the last 2 days. I did actually delete a few slides just before jumping in here because I don't want to. I'm just going to add, see if I can't see the chat very well. So just in case there's Vicky or Gabby jump in and let me know if I've missed something, please. I wanted just to focus on some of the solution side of things through the talk this afternoon, and these are hard questions, but they're good questions and we welcome them. So I really do appreciate the general tone of most of the attendees over the last 2 days. I think that we are working together looking for solutions and we have the same goals. So let me see if I can advance slides here better. There we go. So the hard questions. So first of all, we've talked about this a little bit already. I'm summarizing the last couple of days of thoughts here. What drives the production of plants? So yes, it is consumer demand, but it's also I think somebody yesterday said, it solves a problem, right? It has characteristics that people want. But it also has to be commercializable. We have to be able to put it in production. Sometimes there is the only way to propagate something is to have certain understock, and that's not sold at the retail level. But yes, if things don't go well, it can become the dominant one. But it is part of the package of production, and of course, it has to survive, right? What makes things desirable? Mainly the beauty of it, right? It's either the color or the habit or the shape or whether it's an evergreen or not, and it's suitable for a certain environment. But as noted yesterday, many of the features that make plants suitable for specific environments can be the invasive features that we're concerned about. And this is the challenging question for us. What does it really mean? What does invasive mean? And everyone here has an idea of what that means. And I would say that we're 99% aligned. We sometimes struggle with some of the finer nuances, though. Of course, if they reproduce, if they and have large numbers, if they mature too quickly, if they spread easily, if they're tolerant to certain things that would normally keep growth in check. Difficult or challenging to eradicate, that's also very important. And perhaps the most important one is that they can monopolize resources to the detriment of other species. And I think some would add, I think a lot of the people on this call would feel that non-native would be part of this definition. And that's I think where it gets hard for us, because we see that there are that's not always part of our definition. And so it doesn't mean that we can't keep talking and that the game's over. It just means that we're coming at it from different angles. I don't know why I did that. So conversations moving from stop growing invasive to only growing natives is where we're a little bit concerned, because we obviously support biodiversity. We are stewards of the land in our own ways, and we care deeply about our communities and where our plants go. We support building and maintaining healthy ecosystems, and we understand that native plants are also critical for those ecosystems. But should we just say, that's it, we're never going to sell another non-native plant again? I think that we're not ready for that. And a lot of people want us to be ready for that. And we can see that vision for the long term might be realistic, but it's not a short-term solution. And we can't get there in a big leap. We're going to have to go in stages. We want to avoid this anti-non-native sentiment. There's always going to be some demand. I believe, like Saskia laid it out extremely well, there's a huge range of what people want, and the demand for non-natives will not drop 100%. A lot of non-natives still have value. We understand that they're not always as good as natives for biodiversity and other aspects of ecology, but they still may have value. And we do support that appropriate plant production and sales should be a priority for our sector. And we talked already quite a bit about this. Why isn't there more demand? And I think I'll kind of keep moving through because we have spent a lot of time on this. I think we need to move to the bigger question of how do we change what people want? What are they? And Jason mentioned that earlier today, and some others. How do we change what the vision of beauty is, and how do we show them that there is beauty in a diversity of plants and avoiding the invasive pieces as we're defining them, of course. How can production nurseries adapt to those needs and to those wants from the demand, and how can we pay for that? How can we market natives with success? How can we, and we've talked about through the day, Saskia and some of the others have mentioned, when it looks overgrown or it doesn't have bloom at the right time, and it's more expensive than the non-native that's next to it, how do we make that sale happen? And that's huge. That's a huge challenge. So I think the focus for my part today is to share with you what we are working on, so that you know that we are not standing by and not ignoring what the issue. I think fundamentally it sounds, there's a couple of comments that came through the chat and yesterday, I think that I thought, okay, I need to say this, that we are following the law. So whenever if there's a CFIA restriction, prohibition, we cannot bring that plant in. I mean, that's the way it is. CFIA is responsible, like as they said yesterday, Lauren was talking about, it stops at the border. That's their role, right, is to protect the introduction. And then the provincial and territorial groups are responsible for managing, once it's here, now what do we do kind of thing. And it's an unfortunate division of work and priorities, but that's sort of functionally how it happens, at least in Ontario. We don't trade or grow prohibited and restricted plants. We are following those rules, and we spend a lot of energy communicating through our organization to make sure that all the growers and even non-members, I remember reaching out last year when Salvinia was put on the Ontario list, even to non-members, and just going through Google and phone books and trying to figure out who in Ontario could possibly be growing any of these aquatics that have been banned, and calling them and talking to them and making sure that they knew, and they are following. So I think that was an important point I wanted to make. And it's been made already. We're often dealing with long crop cycles, so long transition times are needed. And some of the initiatives specifically that we're doing include, we've established an invasive horticultural plants committee. We've had discussions for many years with OIPC. We've been on OIPC's board of directors for a while. We've been engaged with the Ministry of Natural Resources, and we communicate often with the Invasive Species Center. So we have a lot of interaction. But we've finally formalized a committee that is going to be focused on tackling this issue. We have reached out to OIPC. We're really interested in supporting the Grow Me Instead guide and collaborating on appropriate plants, finding better solutions. As Saskia said, there are times at the garden center level that the recommended plant isn't exactly a good replacement. Maybe it's not available. How can we help build a stronger and better Grow Me Instead guide? And we have a lot of knowledge. Think about all of the growers that we have and the skills that we see. Paul, for example, there are a lot of growers across the country that have so much to contribute. So we want to tap into that. The garden center messaging is critical. And I think that it kind of builds on that code of conduct that Invasive Canada has developed, and we were part of that as well. I think at the end of the day, the big point that I'm seeing in the chat and in all the questions is, why are you still selling it? Stop selling it. That's the answer. And so we can't put a note on it that says, don't buy this plant because it's invasive, or just this is invasive, because there's no point in even having it in the garden center at that point, or growing it at all. And that's where we want to go, but that's not where we are right now for all plants. We can definitely do that, like Vandermeer has done for certain plants, and there's lots of nurseries and garden centers that I could say have done these things, have cut certain plants. But we're not there. We're not ready to cut them all, but we will get there. And so, so the code of conduct is a really good place to start. The Grow Me Instead is the next step to say, okay, here's these. We'll move them to the back. We'd like you to grow this instead. Saskia had it right. It's a win. If we get one plant that's switched over, that they pick instead, we've made a win, and then we'll get another one, and we'll build their trust. We have thought about one of the projects that we're looking at for next year is to find ways to make the code of conduct not a regulatory heavy-handed tool, but to make it more applicable to farms and push them further to answer questions and to build an action plan to move ahead. And that is what we call the EFP in our language. That's the Environmental Farm Plan. And I'm kind of excited about this opportunity that we could maybe build a whole worksheet within the Environmental Farm Plan, which is a national thing. It's done differently in different provinces, but it's fundamentally, there's worksheets for different best management practices and moving your farm towards more environmental stewardship. And we could develop that. And I think that's a great opportunity. Farms actually in Ontario, I think it's might be beyond Ontario, it might be national. In order to access programs like Agri-Invest, they actually have to prove that they've prepared an environmental farm plan and that they have an action plan that's been approved by a third party. That's a great opportunity, right? They don't have access until they've done it. So that's a really great thing. The market study, we did one about 8 years ago. It's dated. We looked at certain plants that are on a lot of lists that are potentially invasive and that we should look at removing, and what would the cost be to our sector and how would we transition. So we would like to invest in redoing that market study and reevaluating the numbers from then. And of course, we have developed a website landing page with resources that we hope to build on over time. And just to reiterate that we're willing and ready to support biodiversity and mitigate climate change. And okay, so what do we need to make this happen? I'm going to wrap up in about a minute. Healthy debate. We want to have all voices heard. We want to make sure that we have time to get through this and the funds to get through this. We want to have consistent and solid messaging. We need the consumer to think differently. So how do we work with the public to change what they see? Internally, we need to have a champion. And again, I want to reiterate the need for that science-based approach to looking at what does invasive actually mean. And regulatory side, regulations can make a difference, but I think regulation without consultation and a very robust transition plan will hurt many operations. And we want a lot of different groups at the table that would have value. And to remember that we have shared outcomes that are very similar. So our focus will be to have a collective effort to change consumer demand while doing the work that we're doing internally with our growers. And so I just want to do a shout out to the partners that have been working with us, including our growers. And we hope to meet you in the field. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Janine. That was great. We put you last because we knew you'd be such a strong ending. So thank you very much for that. I think that really wrapped up things very nicely. Well, thank you very much to our panelists for that final session. I think that was such a strong way to end today's event or this last 2 days we've had. We are going to move into, if you're able to stick with us, a very, very brief wrap up. So I'll invite my colleagues back on here to help me do that.
Thank you to our event supporters and our moderators. Thank you, all of you in the crowd. And last but not least, let's thank our event supporters, ECCC and the Green Shovels Collaborative. This event was made possible and is offered free to the public thanks to the support of Environment and Climate Change Canada. The Growing Solutions Horticultural Conference is also co-hosted with OIPC in partnership with the Green Shovels Collaborative. Green Shovels is a collaborative of like-minded conservation organizations and a collection of projects designed to achieve job creation, economic recovery, and environmental progress while addressing invasive species issues. The program has been made possible thanks to the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and is administered by the Invasive Species Centre and a number of other key partners. Thank you, everyone. Miigwech. Merci. It was a really, really great day together, and we look forward to what the future will bring.